When the narcissist's mask shatters into a total psychic collapse, you don't just lose a partner, you become the greatest threat to their survival. Today, I'm deconstructing the deadly reality of narcissistic mortification so you can recognize the zombie stare before they try to erase the only person who witnessed their shame. The air in the room felt heavy, almost thick, as the realization settled into my bones that my world had shrunk until it was only the size of his shadow. I was living inside a masterpiece of a lie, and the paint was starting to peel, revealing a rotting structure beneath the gold leaf. You might think you'd see it coming, the walls closing in, the friends falling away, the dreams being replaced by grand promises that never actually arrive. But it happens in the quiet moments, in the way they mirror your deepest hopes and sell them back to you at a price you can't afford to pay. It's a slow-motion heist of the soul. I'm going to show you how I recognize the signs of a psychological Ponzi scheme before it cost me everything, and how you can reclaim your reality when someone is trying to overwrite it. This is about the subtle art of isolation, where the person who claims to love you the most slowly unplugs you from every support system you ever had until they are the only source of power left in your life. I felt that familiar cold dread, realizing that every "we" he uttered was really just a him in disguise, and every dream he shared was a brick in a wall he was building around my sanity. I looked at the phone on the counter, realizing I was afraid to pick it up, afraid of what he would say if he saw a name on the screen that wasn't his. I realized that my isolation wasn't a sudden event, but a series of small, polite requests that I had mistaken for devotion. He didn't tell me I couldn't see my friends. He just made me feel so guilty for leaving him alone that I eventually stopped asking. He didn't tell me to quit my job. He just made my workplace seem like a toxic environment that was beneath my potential, convincing me that he was the only one who truly supported my growth. The isolation was framed as us against the world, a romanticized version of a prison cell where he held the only key and dictated every breath I took. Every person I loved had become a distraction from our mission, and every hobby I had was a waste of time that we could be spending building our empire. I was alone in a crowded room of his making. I remember the early days when he would talk about our future children and name them before we'd even had dinner 3 times. He didn't just suggest we travel. He spent hours showing me floor plans for a villa in Tuscany that we were going to buy by next summer. He would pull up high-resolution photos of rolling hills and vine-covered stone walls, pointing out where my office would be and where the sunlight would hit the patio in the morning. He spoke about the smell of the olive trees and the specific way we would host dinner parties for people who actually appreciated us. He would describe the texture of the stone and the vintage of the wine we would serve, painting a picture so vivid I could almost taste the dust of the Italian roads. It felt like I had finally met someone who saw me, who shared my vision for a big, expansive life. He would talk about the schools our children would attend and the legacy we would leave behind, weaving a web of destiny that made the present feel like a mere formality. But while he was painting these shimmering landscapes of success, the light in our actual apartment was flickering because he hadn't bothered to pay the utility bill for the 2nd month in a row. He used my own aspirations as a leash, a tactic of future faking that kept me hooked on the someday, so I wouldn't look too closely at the right now. He would spend hours researching the exact specifications of the car he promised to buy me. Yet he couldn't be prompted to put his own dishes in the sink or contribute to the groceries. The contrast was staggering, but when you are starving for a future, you learn to ignore the hunger pains of the present. You tell yourself that the current struggle is just a necessary prologue to the epic story he's promised you, never realizing that he has no intention of writing the next chapter. He was selling me a dream with no intention of delivering a reality, a psychological Ponzi scheme where my hope was the only currency being traded. I was financing his ego with my future, and the interest rates were destroying my present. Every time I questioned the timeline, He would double down on the details, adding more layers to the fantasy until the sheer weight of the lie made it feel more real than the empty refrigerator in our kitchen. He wasn't just lying, he was terraforming my reality to suit his needs for control and admiration. He made me feel like the crazy one for noticing that his bank balance never matched his bravado, shielding his incompetence with the promise of a grand inheritance or a secret business deal that was always just about to close. This is not just lying. It is a calculated distraction mechanism designed to buy them time and keep you in a state of perpetual waiting. They offer a buy now, pay never scheme where you invest your emotions, your time, your money, and your loyalty today, while they promise a payout that is never intended to clear the bank. They look for your unfulfilled hunger, that part of you that wants to be rescued or recognized, and they build a digital rendering of that world, inviting you to move in before the foundation is even poured. They make these grand promises while failing to manage basic current responsibilities. If they cannot pay for a simple dinner or refuse to fix a leaky faucet, they are not building an empire. They are building a prison made of mirrors. When you bring up a current relationship issue, they pivot to that grandiose future vision, asking how you could possibly worry about the dishes when you are destined for greatness together. It is a masterful deflection, a psychological sleight of hand that makes you feel small and ungrateful for questioning the architect of your supposed paradise. You find yourself apologizing for noticing the cracks in the floor because they've convinced you the ceiling is made of stars. They use the future to invalidate the present, making your legitimate needs today seem like obstacles to a glorious tomorrow. This creates a state of cognitive dissonance where you begin to doubt your own senses, choosing to believe in his mirage rather than the dry, parched reality of your actual life. They promise marriage when you ask for honesty. They promise a business partnership when you ask for reliability. It is a constant game of moving the goalposts so that you are always running toward a finish line that doesn't exist. You become an investor in a company that produces nothing but promises, and you are so deep in the sunk cost that you are afraid to admit the venture is bankrupt. The motive is distraction and retention. It keeps you hooked during the devaluation phase because you are waiting for the promised land he's guaranteed is just around the corner. He's harnessing your hope to enslave your will, using your highest aspirations as the very bars that keep you locked away from a healthy life. He knows that if he can keep you dreaming, you will never wake up to the nightmare of your daily existence. I started to feel a strange, hollow pride in my own endurance. I became a master at managing his volatile shifts and keeping the peace, unaware that I was slipping into the role of an inverted narcissist. I didn't have a separate identity anymore. I had merged so completely into his chaos that I only felt alive when I was stabilizing his world or fixing the messes he left behind. I was the mold, and he was the gold, and I was being crushed under the weight of his expectations. I found myself bored by healthy, stable people. They felt monochrome and dull compared to the technicolor adrenaline of his drama. I was addicted to the rush of the cycle, believing that my ability to survive his moods made me indispensable. I thought my endurance was a superpower, but it was actually my cage. I began to compete in my own mind about how much I could take, how many insults I could swallow, and how many times I could save him from his own poor decisions. I would stay up until 3 a.m, meticulously crafting ways to present a problem to him so it wouldn't trigger a blowout, feeling a sick sense of accomplishment when I managed to navigate a conversation without a crisis. I felt like a high-wire artist, performing for an audience of one, convinced that if I just balanced perfectly enough, the relationship would finally become what he promised. My sense of self-worth was tied to his level of satisfaction, a metric that was impossible to satisfy because his needs were a bottomless pit. I took pride in being the strong one, the one who could handle his complexity, not realizing that I was just a highly efficient shock absorber for his dysfunction. This is the hallmark of the co-narcissist, someone who finds their value only in their proximity to the grandiose ego. I was seeking vicarious supply, basking in his reflected light, because I had forgotten how to generate my own. I felt like a martyr, but I was really just a servant who had mistaken my servitude for importance. I became a competitive martyr, silently tallying up the sacrifices I made as if they were credits I could trade for his love, never realizing that he viewed my sacrifices not as gifts, but as the minimum entry fee for the privilege of being near him. I was deriving a secondary sense of importance from being the only person who truly understood him, which is exactly where he wanted me, isolated in a private world of mutual delusion. This vicarious supply meant I was seeking my wholeness through his grandiosity. I felt like a martyr, taking pride in the sacrifice. I even started pimping for him intellectually, talking him up to friends and colleagues, lining up admirers for him to exploit just so I could bask in the glow of his supposed wins. I was the one writing his emails, polishing his image, and smoothing over his social blunders, all while he took the credit. I had internalized the oppression so deeply that I was recreating the golden cage of a restrictive childhood, seeking to be the perfect servant to a king who didn't exist. I felt a twisted sense of loyalty to the very person who was stripping me of my autonomy, convinced that our special connection was worth the slow erosion of my soul. I was his protector, his publicist, and his punching bag all at once, and I wore those labels like medals of honor. I didn't realize that in my effort to make him feel big, I was becoming non-existent. I was disappearing into the background of his life, a ghost haunting my own existence, waiting for a thank you that was never going to come. I was vicariously living through his projected success, ignoring the fact that my own life was a wasteland of neglected potential and unfulfilled needs. I had become a supporting character in my own story, and he was the director who kept cutting my lines. I justified his behavior to anyone who would listen, becoming an advocate for my own oppressor, believing that if I could just make the world see his genius, he would finally be able to love me the way I needed. I was procuring validation for him, hand-feeding his ego, while my own identity was starving to death in the corner of the room we shared. I felt essential to his survival, but I was actually just essential to his facade. I was the scaffolding, holding up a hollow building, convinced that I was the architect of something grand. The mask didn't just slip, it underwent a total internal nuclear explosion when he was finally caught in a public lie he couldn't explain away at a professional gathering. I watched him enter a state of narcissistic mortification, a total collapse where his false self was completely disabled. He looked like a zombie, disoriented and paranoid, his eyes darting around the room as if he were being hunted. His words began spinning into a salad of nonsense as he tried to rewrite history in real time, claiming he'd never said things that dozens of people had just heard him say. It was a deathly silence that preceded a terrifying internal disintegration. I realized then that because I had witnessed his shame, I was now a threat. To survive his own self-loathing, he would have to erase me from his life entirely, or make me the villain of his story. When the false self is punctured, the person inside is not a hurt child, it is a void that will consume everything in its path to stop the pain of being seen for what they really are. This is the eye of the storm, a terrifying calm that acts as a precursor to a massive explosion of rage or a sudden, cold discard. I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten and a glaze fall over his eyes, and I knew that the person I thought I loved was gone, replaced by a defensive mechanism that viewed me as an enemy combatant. The air around him seemed to vibrate with a deadly intensity, a silent scream of a psyche that was tearing itself apart because it couldn't handle the light of the truth. He was experiencing a total psychic annihilation, and the only way he could survive it was to destroy the person who had seen the explosion. The disorientation was palpable. He seemed to forget where he was, his paranoia spiking as he accused everyone in the room of a conspiracy against him. This was mortification, the nuclear option of the narcissistic psyche, and I was standing right in the fallout zone. His eyes became dark pits of unadulterated shame, and in that moment, I knew there was no going back. The man I knew had died, and what was left was a wounded animal, ready to stab anyone who witnessed his weakness. If you are listening to this, and you feel that cold dread, if you are waiting for a promised land while the person next to you can't handle the basic responsibilities of today, you must stop writing checks on funds that haven't cleared. Ignore the grand words about the future and judge the relationship strictly on what is happening in this very moment. You need to start performing micro-tests. If they say they will call at 5 o'clock and they don't, or if they promise to handle a small task and forget it every time, do not believe them when they say they will take care of you in retirement. Their words are a currency that has no value because there is no character backing them up. Look at the data, not the drama. If the data says they are unreliable, inconsistent, and selfish today, then that is the only future you are actually buying into. Focus on the here and now. If you have to ask for the bare minimum and it still feels like pulling teeth, the villa in Tuscany is a graveyard for your soul. Watch how they react to your small no. A person who loves you respects your boundaries. A person who wants to own you sees a no as an act of war. You have to be willing to see the person as they are, not as you hope they will become. Hope is a beautiful thing, but in the hands of a manipulator, it is a weapon used against you. Reclaim your agency by observing their actions with the cold eye of a detective. Don't listen to what they say they will do. Watch what they actually do when no one is looking. Pay attention to the someday deflection. When you bring up a bill that needs paying or a boundary that was crossed, and they respond with a dream of an empire, realize that they are using a fairy tale to silence your reality. If they can't handle a conversation about the dishes, they certainly can't handle a life of mutual respect. Trust the evidence of your eyes over the poetry of their lies. Reclaim your dreams and detach them from their participation. If you want to start a business or buy a home, build a plan that does not require them to be the foundation. You have to recognize the addiction to the high-stakes drama and understand that normal only feels boring because you are used to a state of constant survival. Your nervous system is fried, accustomed to the spikes of cortisol and the temporary relief of a reconciliation. Building your own financial and emotional independence is the only way to break the mold. If you see them undergoing that total collapse, that state of disoriented rage after they've been humiliated, do not try to comfort them. Your pity will only be seen as a claim of superiority, which will trigger an even deeper, deadly rage. Remove yourself physically and emotionally. The only clinical advice that works in the face of mortification is distance. You cannot fix someone who views your help as an insult to their ego. You are a utility to them, not a partner. And once that utility is compromised by the truth, you are in danger. They would rather destroy the witness than deal with the shame of the testimony. They will try to pull you back into the orbit of their collapse, but you must remain an island. You must be your own sanctuary. You must rebuild your finances, your friendships, and your faith in your own judgment. The path back to yourself is long, but it is the only road worth traveling. Autonomy is your only protection. Identify the addiction to the rush. Acknowledge that peace feels like a threat because you've lived in war for so long, and begin the slow process of rebuilding a separate, distinct identity that does not rely on his approval for its existence. Re-establish contact with the people he made you push away. They are the anchors that will keep you from drifting back into his storm. You deserve a life that is built on solid ground, not a shimmering mirage that disappears every time you get close. Rebuilding your identity takes time, and it requires you to sit with the silence until you remember who you were before you became their shock absorber. It is the most important work you will ever do. You are not a utility to be used. You are a person with a future that belongs entirely to you. You have to learn to be okay with boring until your nervous system recalibrates to peace. Real love is found in the consistency of the mundane, not the grandiosity of the impossible. It's in the person who shows up, who pays the bills, and who respects your no without a fight. If this story resonated with you or helped you see the cracks in a dream someone else is selling you, please subscribe and like this video so we can keep deconstructing these tactics together. Stay sharp, stay focused on the reality in front of you, and remember that your gut check is the most powerful tool you own. You have the strength to walk away from the someday and start living for yourself today. I'm right here with you, and I know you can find your way back to the light. Don't let them hold your aspirations hostage. Reclaim your life, one boundary at a time. Your future is too valuable to be spent waiting for a promise that was never meant to be kept. You are stronger than the lie they told you, and your reality is worth fighting for. Trust yourself again. It's the first step toward a freedom you haven't felt in a very long time. You are not responsible for their shame, and you are not required to be the sacrifice for their survival. Take your power back, step out of the technicolor trap, and embrace the beautiful, stable reality of a life that is finally your own. Reclaiming your life isn't just about leaving, it's about coming home to yourself. You've got this, and I'll be here for the next step of the journey. Keep your eyes open and your heart protected. The dream they sold you was a ghost, but the life you can build for yourself is real. If this story opened your eyes to the mirage someone else has been painting for you, do not let that insight go to waste. You deserve a life built on the solid ground of reality, not the shifting sands of empty promises. Please subscribe and like the video. Your support helps us reach more people who are still trapped in the someday and helps them reclaim their right now. Stay sharp, trust your gut, and remember that your future is too precious to be held hostage by a lie. You have the strength to walk away and build something real. I am right here with you. I will see you in the next one.